Jonathan, I really wanted to have you back. We had a wonderful conversation a couple of years ago, and you've done a lot of work since then. And I've done a lot of thinking about it too. I must admit, and I think I'm not alone. Since you published The Anxious Generation in 2024, a lot of research has come out on the subject. Your book has been cited as a part of the inspiration for some new laws that are trying to shield children from social media. As we all know, there's a major law passed in Australia, which we'll get to. And a trial has just started
That's right.
in the state of California against social media companies. And that seems really significant.
Yes.
Talk me through what's going on in California.
That's right. So these companies they were given blanket immunity for action back in the 90s. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act said we can't sue Meta or TikTok because of what someone else posted on Meta or TikTok.
As a First Amendment idea?
It was it was actually done to incentivize the companies to moderate, because they were afraid if they take anything down, now they're responsible for every single decision. So Congress said, you know what? And you can go ahead and take down porn, and don't worry, no one can sue you if you leave something up. They wanted to give them more freedom of action. And so it was a good idea originally. But the courts have interpreted it so widely that you have all these parents with dead kids. And in many cases, it's just crystal clear. I mean, the kid got sextorted on Snapchat and was dead that night. Okay, that wasn't a correlation. That was causation. You have kids who, a happy 11-year-old girl, she gets on Instagram, and a few weeks later, she's developing an eating disorder. So you have all these parents whose kids have been killed or damaged, and not one has ever gotten justice. Not one has ever even been able to face Meta in court. Meta has never faced a jury. None of these companies have ever faced a jury because they keep saying, oh, Section 230, you can't touch us. Now, how insane is it that the makers of the largest consumer product in the world, that is the one that most children use, seems to be harming and killing a lot of them, can never be held responsible for their actions.
Do you have any numbers for this?
So in terms of sextortion, we know one number from Snap was that they were getting 10,000 reports of sextortion from their users in 2022. And that wasn't 10,000 a year. That was 10,000 a month. And so 100,000 reports. And as they said themselves, this is probably the tip of the iceberg because most people don't report.
Right.
And also, again, the boys who kill themselves, they don't report either. And with AI automating sextortion, it's going to go way up. When we look at harms to mental health, we tend to find 20 to 30% of the girls are saying it harmed my mental health. So that puts you up over 10 million right there. And that's just in the U.S. So if we look at the harms to mental health, what we try to argue in this paper is the specific harms that we go through, the direct harms and the indirect harms, are at such a scale that this could plausibly have caused those big increases in 2012 in mental illness.
So what's happening in California?
What's happening in California is that of the thousands and thousands of parents who are suing, it can't be combined into a class action suit because class action suit requires that all the plaintiffs have been harmed in the same way, right. And in this case, the stories are all a little different. So what the justice system is doing is they've created what's called a multi-district litigation, in which it's several thousand cases will be heard by a single judge, a single court in California. Now, of course, that's impossible. So the idea is the two sides argue about which cases to consider. They pick bellwether cases. Those cases go to trial in front of a jury. And then based on what those jury trials are, it'll kind of be clear which way everything has to go. So that's where we are. There are so many members of Gen Z and young people who are advocating for reform. And so they're sitting in the courtroom.
What's the desirable outcome?
The desirable outcome is that a jury, which decides questions of fact, decides that, in fact, social media is addictive. And it was designed to maximize engagement. They use various tricks to basically addict kids.
When you say tricks,
yeah,
what do you mean?
Oh, you ever notice when on an iPhone, when you pull down, like you want to check your email, you pull down, and then it kind of bounces up and you get new ones?
Yeah.
That was literally copied from slot machines. Literally. I mean, these guys, they took a course at Stanford called Persuasive Design in the early 2000s.
Right.
One of the founders of Instagram took the course, and they used, behaviorist principles.
I met with some leaders of Apple, and I raised a couple of these, just in conversation, raised a couple of your main points.
What'd they say?
Turn it off. Ration your time.
Oh, yeah.
Be more logical about how you use it.
Yeah.
It's a great machine. You just have to,
Yeah.
They were, I have to say, pretty blasé about it.
That's right. As a social psychologist, my rule is if one person is doing something bad or stupid, that person might be bad or stupid. But if all of us are doing something that seems bad or stupid, it's probably a bad situation that's making us all behave this way. We have a lot of experience with addictive products. We know a lot about gambling, how it ruins people's lives. Not everyone's susceptible, but a lot are. Same with alcohol, same with cigarettes. So we have a lot of experience with addictive substances. And the rule number one of addictive substances is we don't let companies give them to kids. We say, adults, you can, we're going to trust you to regulate, and, 10% of you can be severely damaged, but that's your choice. My God, we don't say that about kids.
Do you think your subject, your obsession of late, is related to something that concerns me very much, which is the decline of reading? We see all this information, these statistics about the number of people who have or have not read one book in the past year.
Yes, this actually, I now believe, is the biggest damage. So when I was writing The Anxious Generation, I focused on the mental health damage because that's where the evidence is best. Certainly it was 3 years ago. And I mention attention fragmentation, I mention addiction, but I don't have a lot on it. Okay, the book comes out, and now everyone begins talking about they can't pay attention anymore. And it's not just kids, it's adults are beginning to say that they can't pay attention. And then we start hearing, as you
I'm
said,
telling you, it's hard for
everyone
me.
I
I'm a
talk to.
professional reader, and as I told you before we went on the air, I have to take my phone and put it in the kitchen so that I can, in the other room, read manuscripts, read a book, God forbid. And it strikes me as the rise of the phone, and all it implies is the greatest experiment in human consciousness, in a sense,
Absolutely.
that hasn't been thought through.
Absolutely.
It's just speeding 60 miles an hour into our lives and carrying us along.
With effects far beyond what we can imagine. Let's talk about a few of them. So first, to understand why this is. So the key neurotransmitter here is dopamine. Everyone's heard of dopamine. Dopamine is not exactly a reward neurotransmitter. It's better thought of as the neurotransmitter of motivation. And so, if you eat a potato chip, it tastes really good, and then that makes you want another.
Potato chip.
Want another. Sure. Okay. And so keep your eye on, so dopamine is wonderful. And we want our kids to experience a lot of slow dopamine. Slow dopamine is your kid is trying to build a treehouse, and at first he fails, and he makes some progress, which feels really good. And so he's motivated to work harder, and then he fails again. And over time, and then eventually he finishes, and boy, what satisfaction that is. So that's how you raise an adult, is you give them a lot of experiences of slow dopamine. They learn to set goals and pursue them. Here's how you undermine that. Make available to every child from the age of 2, hand them an iPad, and what the child will quickly learn unconsciously is they're looking at something, and within 8 seconds they will know, this is kind of interesting, but it's not swipe. Oh, wow, this is so funny. Oh, this is great. So quick dopamine. They go someplace else, sort of. So this is the experience that young people have had, and since birth now. Kids are given iPads routinely when they're in their strollers. So what happens? I had a conversation about this with my students at NYU.
So this is not just crabby college professors whining about their students not reading Middlemarch in a week.
No, this is the subversion of the ability to pay attention on a species-wide level. As one of my students said, because I showed her that Atlantic article about students aren't reading books anymore, and she said, yeah, it's true. She said, I pick up a book, I read a sentence, I get bored, I go to TikTok. Because, again, you've been on this book for 8 seconds, and it's not that interesting. But the thing in my pocket is a lot more interesting. Quick dopamine. So this is what we've done. And this is even worse for the boys, because for the boys, it's video games, it's porn, it's vaping, it's gambling, it's sports betting. So for boys, it's open season on their dopamine systems, and this is going to make it very hard for them to develop executive function, follow goals, be useful as employees or spouses.
So you came in today, and you put in front of me a paper that you've said is the most important research you've done. It's called Social Media is Harming Young People at a Scale Large Enough to Cause Changes at the Population Level. The New Yorker, we wouldn't call that a good print title. It'd be a good SEO title.
Okay.
But tell me what this report is all about. You and your co-author, Zachary Rausch, have published this year, well, in 2026.
Okay, sure. So the defenders of social media, especially Mark Zuckerberg, will say whenever whenever they're questioned, they say, actually, well, here's a quote from Mark Zuckerberg when he was questioned under oath in the U.S. Senate, January 31st, 2024. He says, quote, mental health is a complex issue, and the existing body of scientific work has not shown a causal link between using social media and young people having worse mental health outcomes. His claim in multiple places is it's just a correlation and you can't prove that it's causation. But what Zach and I have done is we have laid out 7 different lines of evidence. We're trying to reframe the argument as one that can actually be solved. So what Zach and I have done is we have reconceptualized this in a way that I think will make a lot of sense to people. We do have ways of knowing if A caused B in the law and in social science. And so we have lots and lots of studies, surveys of young people. What do they say? Do the young people think that social media is great for their mental health? Absolutely not. So what we do, so this is line 1, what the victims say. And in Exhibit A, we present a bunch of surveys of young people. For example,
And these are surveys done by whom?
So Pew, Gallup, Common Sense Media, many international outlets as well. We cover international research as well. So Pew, which is probably the main source of evidence here, 2024, they found 1/3 of girls say that social media makes them feel worse about their lives. 50% say it harms their sleep. It all comes back to this question of correlation versus causation. So I laid out line 1 is what the victims say, and they say he did it. Line 2 is what the witnesses say, and that's the parents, the teachers, the psychologists, the psychiatrists. They all say, they have very negative views of this. They see it up close. They say, this is causing anxiety disorders. This is harming my patients. And then the third line is what the perpetrators say. So we have quote after quote from inside the company. I'll just read a couple very briefly.
Sure.
From TikTok. An internal research report. Compulsive usage correlates with a slew of negative mental health effects like loss of analytical skill, memory formation, contextual thinking, conversational depth, empathy, and it correlates with increased anxiety. And it goes on and on. So they know that they are hurting kids. Meta. There are reasons to worry about self-control and use of our products.
Who's speaking here?
So this is, let me find the end of the quote, a member of Meta's core data science team and a senior data scientist at Meta having a conversation. So let me see. Without providing much more value, how to keep someone returning over and over to the same behavior each day? Intermittent rewards are most effective. Think slot machine. They are trying to hook children.
Let's talk about another country where something has been done about this. Late last year, Australia enacted a new law requiring age verification for social media users. I think that's the first national law of its kind.
It was.
What does this verification look like, and how is it working?
So the Australia bill was very carefully drafted. They commissioned a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Robert French, to figure out how it would be done. And it specifically says it's up to the companies to do it. It's their responsibility. And it specifically says the companies cannot only ask for a government ID. They have to offer an alternate way. And there already were dozens of companies that offer alternate ways.
Wait, how does it work?
So the law tells the companies, you guys figure it out, and you can't just say, show me your driver's license. You have to offer something else. And there are dozens of companies that offer that service. So the idea is you want to open an account on Instagram. Let's say you go to Instagram, you put in your birthday. It then kicks you over to a page which says, here are 4 ways that you can validate that you're old enough. And
so it's not an honor system. Yes, I'm 18, on we go.
That's right. From until December 10th, which is when it went into effect, the world was on the honor system. Porn, are you 18? Yes, you're in. So that began to end on December 10th.
Why did this happen first in Australia?
So in Australia, it just so happens that the wife of the Premier of South Australia read The Anxious Generation soon after it came out. And she said to her husband, Peter Malinauskas, you got to read this book and you've got to effing do something about it.
Right.
And he did. And he called up Robert French and said, how could we do this? And they did it.
How is it coming along in Australia?
So here's what we know. So Julie Inman-Grant, their e-safety commissioner, put out a press release 3 or 4 weeks ago. She said all 10 of the covered platforms have complied. They took down 4.7 million accounts from the 2.4 million Australian kids in that age range. And of course, some are getting around it with VPNs. Although I heard from someone who's studying it, VPN usage went way up at first, but it came way back down because the kids, they want to check their social media use. They want to check it 30 times a day, and if you have to load up a VPN, it's a bit of friction. So of course, kids are still getting around it. But as Julie pointed out, we're trying to change the norms of a nation, the norms of childhood. We won't really know the full effect for 10 or 20 years.
How does it affect schools and phones?
So there's two things. One is locking up the phones in the morning, a phone-free school policy, and that has magical effects, transformative effects. Some schools don't implement it well, they don't enforce it well, and then there's cheating. But in schools that enforce it reasonably well, the results are always spectacular. The thing that you always hear is, we hear laughter in the hallways again. The lunchroom is so loud. Kids are laughing. I spoke to...
That sounds too good to be true. Do we know this to be the case?
There's first of all, it's very hard to find an account anywhere of one that backfired, and that would be newsworthy. So there are a lot of efforts to measure going on. Angela Duckworth at Penn is doing a major assessment, and she showed me some preliminary data in which the schools that used lockers, that really took the phones away for the day, that used special phone lockers, they got the best results, teacher reports, academic outcomes. And the ones that used yonder pouches got good results, not as good. And the ones that use a backpack policy, which a lot of schools do, unfortunately, say, keep it in your backpack, don't take it out. Which, of course, look, if you're a cocaine addict and you're told you can keep your cocaine with you all day long. So, yeah. So it does seem to be working incredibly well.
Now, the biggest argument against the Australian policy, or bringing the Australian policy to the United States, is a First Amendment argument. Mm-hmm. Explain the First Amendment argument and obviously why you disagree with it. Mm-hmm.
So, of course, the First Amendment is that Congress shall make no law restricting the freedom of speech. And the companies argue that any kind of regulation, and they have a lot of organizations with nice-sounding names, Internet Freedom or whatever, they argue that any kind of regulation is going to stop somebody from speaking and therefore violates the First Amendment. But the law already says that you have to be 13, because this isn't about who can say what. The laws are written about at what age you can sign a contract. It's about contract law. And right now, the law says a company has to, you have to be 13 before a company can take your data without your parents' knowledge or consent. And the Australian law says, first of all, 13 was too low. Mm-hmm. For a child to sign a contract, they have to be 16. Oh, and guess who has to enforce the age limit? It's not the child, it's the company. So I don't see any First Amendment.
The way a liquor store needs to see your driver's license.
That's right. It can't be up to the parents to keep their kids out of liquor stores and strip clubs. It has to be the person at the door.
How do we maintain some of the real connection and community that young people do find online?
Thanks for asking that, because this is one of the main arguments, is thank God for social media. How could they ever connect if they didn't have social media? How could they find information? To which I say, yeah, kids need to connect. And the best way to connect is in person. And the second best way is by telephone or Zoom or FaceTime. And the worst way to connect is by posting something and having it be public and having people comment on it. Mm-hmm. That seems to be counterproductive. That seems to cause anxiety. That does not make people feel connected.
We've discussed what's happening in Australia. What's it going to take for anything like that to come to the United States? What's the position of the administration?
Mm-hmm. So two things. First, as soon as my book came out, mothers jumped into action, pressed for political action. We got huge amounts of reform in the states. Most states have taken action on phone-free schools, on regulating social media. Here in New York, our governor, Kathy Hochul, has been great on all these issues. So huge amount of action at the state level, huge amount of action around the world. There's only one place that I know of where nothing is happening, and that's the U.S. Congress. Now, what's the role of the administration? Many people assume, because the tech moguls have been buddying up with President Trump, many people assume, and I saw this all over Europe, people are afraid to regulate social media because they think that Trump will come after them and put tariffs on them. But here's the thing that I want everyone to notice about this. Yes, Trump and Elon Musk will be very upset if you try to do content moderation and say what counts as hate speech and what. But if you're protecting kids, they actually have shown a lot of signs of support. So the only thing America has ever done to protect kids is the Take It Down Act, which was pushed by Melania. And the Kids Online Safety Act, the only act that ever almost made it to law a year or two ago. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted support of it. Linda Yaccarino, the CEO of X, tweeted support of it, and Elon Musk amplified her tweet. So the Trump administration, I think the people in the Trump
Those seem like baby steps, though.
well, passing COSA would be huge because
Mm-hmm.
we've never done anything to protect kids ever. And so if we could do something ever in the U.S.
So
Congress.
you see a potential of a coherent Trump administration-led piece of legislation analogous to what's going on in Australia?
Raising the age would be a bigger step, and so that might take a while longer.
Have you ever talked to anybody in the administration?
I've talked with several, not with directly with Trump, but with people in the office of the vice president and so we have some contacts with people in and near the administration.
And what are those conversations like?
Well, they're interested in it because, again, everyone has kids. Everyone sees the threat. Parents everywhere see this as the biggest threat.
You have the same kind of conversations on the Democratic side?
Largely, yes. Largely, yes. The Democrats are.
You're saying largely.
Yeah. So there is. So what happens is Meta puts out a set of talking points to inflame the right, and that is censorship, censorship, censorship.
Right.
And they have a set of talking points to inflame the left, and that is that social media is a lifeline for LGBTQ kids, and that is not true. The internet was a lifeline for them. Kids who were isolated, often rural areas, when the internet came in, now they could find information, they could find others. There were all kinds of ways they were not isolated. So the internet's amazing. Social media is just a small part of the internet, and it's an incredibly toxic part. So it's true. We have so Zach Roush and I have an article in The Atlantic with Lennon Torres, who's a trans activist, and Lennon talks about what happened to her when she was transitioning, and we have data showing that LGBTQ kids, they do use social media more than any other group. They're also much more likely to report having been harmed by it. So social media is not a lifeline for LGBTQ kids. The internet is.
Speaking of that, you cite online predatory behavior and bullying as major issues you're trying to combat. But statistics that have been around suggest that the internet is not the only culprit or even necessarily the main culprit. For instance, the very large majority of exploitation cases involve a culprit the child knows in real life. This is from Michael Hobbs. Is there a risk of ascribing too much harm to the internet and making it just the singular monster in our midst?
Well, it certainly is true that there are other sources of harm, and that's always been true, that it's a man who is somehow tangentially related to the family. And so I wouldn't say that this is everything, but this is where the predators went. When you and I were young, people began to talk about sex predators that hanging around parks, and there were those threats. But they've all moved on to Instagram. There was an article in the New York Times a number of years ago. It's really dangerous to hang out near a playground. You could be arrested and put away for life. But on social media, you have complete anonymity. You can do what you want. And if your account is shut down, you just open up 10 more with different names.
I sense another book coming from you, John.
I think things are moving too fast for another book. I may not write another book. I've got to just
It sounds to me,
write
though,
articles.
interestingly, you've gone from subject to subject over in your adult and academic life, but this seems like now the work of a lifetime.
Yeah, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life because this is the
What does
biggest.
that mean?
What it means is that I have a contract to write a book on democracy called Life After Babel, adapting to a world we may never again share, about what social media is doing to liberal democracy, how it may be incompatible with it. I'd love to write that book, and I might still write it, but by the time I write it, everything could be so radically different in our
How would
country.
you summarize it?
I would summarize it by saying that democracy is a conversation. And when that conversation was in the Agora in Greece, they had one kind of democracy. And when that conversation was during the Gutenberg era, where it took place in print and in places like the New Yorker and CBS News, and it was a different kind of conversation. And that was the glory period of liberal democracy during the Gutenberg era, the best societies humans have ever made. And now we're out of the Gutenberg era. We're into the network era. We will never again know what's true. It'll never be possible to have a shared reality.
So that's not
again.
the fault of Donald Trump. He's a symptom of it, you're saying.
He is the first person who knew how to navigate the new world and to create his own
exploit it.
reality. That's right. If not for Twitter, he could not have become president. But he is, just as it is said that both John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan were extremely adept at the age of television.
Right.
And Neil Postman writes about this, the great 20th century media theorist.
Amusing ourselves to death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, when that conversation moves on to Twitter, what happens to it? Read Federalist 10, where the Founding Fathers worried about people's ability to get pulled off into nonsense and craziness and the ability of a demagogue to inflame the passions. They tried to design safeguards for it, but in the social media age, those safeguards are gone. So I'm extremely alarmed about the future of American democracy unless we can get a handle on what the technology is doing to us, unless we can greatly strengthen our democratic institutions.
So that genie can't go back in the bottle either.
Can't go back in the bottle. So the question is how, and that's why the subtitle of the book is Adapting to a World We May Never Again Share.
Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Thank you, David.